You're listening to Sweet Life, the show that helps you find and walk your own special path. I'm Brooke Peterson. Here on Sweet Life, we like to explore unconventional career possibilities, self-discovery, professional development, and more. Whatever helps and whatever works to make it sweet. Who doesn't love Dexter? If you don't know who I mean, then you're missing out. That's one of my favorite shows. He is the likable serial killer we've come to know and root for on the series Dexter on Showtime. Part of the fun of the show is watching him do his thing as a blood spatter analyst. He can look at a crime scene and figure out what most likely happened based on the blood pattern. Now, I'm not suggesting that my next guest has any other Dexter-like tendencies, but he does analyze crime scenes. Mark Waldo has over 20 years experience in law enforcement and 18 years experience in forensic science and crime scene investigations with the Santa Ana Police Department. He graduated magna cum laude and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice management and is currently pursuing a master's degree in forensic science. He is a board-certified crime scene analyst through the International Association for Identification. Mark has testified in both juvenile and superior courts as a recognized expert in the areas of crime scene investigation, evidence collection, forensic analysis, latent print processing, and gunshot trajectory reconstruction. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you for joining us in studio, Mark Waldo.
Thank you. Good afternoon and happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. I guess I was sort of fishing, wasn't I? I can't help it. Okay, so in the beginning, what made you go to school for criminal justice management?
Well, I have to say that I kind of did that later in life. When I started, you didn't need a degree. It was more of you come on with the police department, start learning on the job, and then you take training courses on your way. It's not until now that a lot of departments are now, although not all of them are required, or requiring a graduate degree. It's going to go that way. So that was my reasoning for going back to school. I kind of did it late in life, and hopefully those listening will get their degree done first.
Well, so even though you had all that experience behind you, they still wanted you to go back and get the degree?
Yes, in order to promote, and also for different reasons. Within the next 5 years, you'll see most departments will require a minimum of a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, I have to ask, what were you like as a kid?
I was the one always getting in trouble. No, I always liked law enforcement, but I always liked putting the puzzle together, figuring things out, taking things apart, and seeing how things work. And I think that plays a lot into why I do what I do today.
Mm-hmm. And how did you come to find law enforcement? How did you come to find that the way of applying those skills?
Well, like I said, I always wanted to be in law enforcement, but I always wanted to be the investigator. I wanted to solve the crime. I didn't always want to be the street cop or the knock-and-talk detective, interviewing people and doing all the paperwork. I really like the hands-on and actually figuring things out, and that's what geared me towards actual forensics and crime scene investigation.
Now, as a kid, were you a big fan of Sherlock Holmes or anything like that? Did you read a lot of those books by any chance?
Yes, I did. Yeah. That was a big thing. We didn't have the new CSI shows as we do today. So.
Well, that's another question. I was going to save it for later on, but since you just brought it up, how accurate are those shows?
Well, there is a thing that we call the CSI effect. And although a lot of the techniques are the techniques that we use, we just can't do it in 45 minutes with commercial breaks. So, but the CSI effect that I speak about is it has affected us. So now when we're out at crime scenes, the victims, that are still there are waiting for us to get results right away. They think we can just take it right back to the lab and have an identification within 20 minutes. And
Oh my
it just
gosh.
doesn't work that way.
That is really interesting. Yeah, I can sort of see our society, I think in general, has become so impatient. And I think that's a really interesting point. So how long does it take to make an identification?
Well, if we get a very good latent fingerprint,
What does that mean, latent?
not visible to the naked eye.
Okay.
So we would dust a surface with powders or chemicals to enhance the fingerprint so that it's visible, and then we'll take that back to the lab, enter it into the Cal ID system, which is the California State Identification System. Mm-hmm. It'll scan. It will give us 10 to 12 different possibilities, and then we have to manually look at them and then make our identification. But if the print's really good, we can get an identification for fingerprints within 20 minutes to an hour.
If it's really good.
If it's really good.
And so if it's really good, does the computer spit out like one match?
No, it still gives us 10 because the computer doesn't really make the identification. It'll break it down.
I love that. I love that it comes
character.
down to the human.
Right, and that's what it comes down to is you have to be trained at making that identification and looking at all the points on a fingerprint to actually make it.
How can you do that? There must be a gazillion, trillion, billion points on a fingerprint. How does that work? Is that too long of a question, or?
Well, there's a lot of training in it, but every fingerprint is identical, or not everyone has an identical fingerprint, not even twins. And there's different characteristics, and we look for all those characteristics, and then we'll look for them in the suspect print.
Now, I'm looking at my fingerprint. Where do you begin? Looking at a fingerprint, where do you start?
Well, on your fingerprint, it's hard to see right now, but if I was to roll your fingerprint in ink, there's an area called the delta, and then there's a core, and then we start looking for bifurcations and ridge endings, and there's a whole system in it.
And so you must blow this up to a pretty good size to do that, right?
Yes, but we have to enter it back into the system at the actual size.
Wow. Okay. And so how often does a fingerprint lead you to the person? Is that the most common form of proof?
Yes, it is, and it's a very good form of proof. However, now with technology, DNA is the newest and latest technique and tool that we're using. And we're now being able to swab a surface for touch DNA.
What does that mean, touch DNA?
Well, if you just touch this counter, if you vigorously touch it, your skin cells are left. And if you come back with a swab, you can pick up those skin cells, and we can enter it into the system and then get your DNA, if your DNA is in the system.
Okay, yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, how many people in our population is actually in the system?
I don't know the actual number of the individuals in, but 2 years ago, the state law passed where all violent criminals are giving their DNA once they're arrested. So they're now going into a database just like the fingerprint system, the AFIS system, and it's another tool that we can use.
Fascinating. So, of these people, well, let me just back up real quick. How often are you actually on the scene? Is that your blanket job, or are you mostly do you receive the information collected and analyzed? Or are you also the one collecting it?
No, I'm also the one collecting it. Every day when I go to work, I respond out to crime scenes, and I respond to everything from a burglary to a homicide, and look for evidence, preserve it, and develop it, analyze it, and then make the identification when I go back.
Okay, so I have to ask the obvious. What's it like being on these crime scenes as a way of life, seeing this, day in and day out?
Well, you do. I get that question a lot, and you do have to be a special type of person. I was in EMS prior, so I was able, and I'm talking about the blood and guts type scenes. So I was able to become accustomed to seeing that.
How long did that take to become accustomed to seeing it?
I'm not sure. Really, after a while, you just you concentrate on doing your job, and you don't look at it as an actual person. If you have a dead body, you look at it as, this is my job, and I have to find the answers as to who did it. And I'm doing this for the victim's family.
Right, right. Has there been, or what was your first crime scene like? Was it shocking? Or after, or even maybe it goes back to the emergency medical technician moment. You know, the first time you were performing in a professional way with something that was, not something a little, uncomfortable.
Well, I think it can be for many, and I don't know if it's just the type of person I am. I'm not Dexter, but I guess I focus in on what my job is, and because I had a lot of trauma calls, and we would go in, and it didn't really faze me to where I was shocked and forgot what I was doing. I just concentrated on what my jobs needed to do and get it done.
So it sounds like you might be really good at focusing and compartmentalizing. Is that correct? And have you always been that way, or have you just sort of learned it on the job?
I think I've always had a little bit of that trait, and I just think I've enhanced it throughout the years.
And you mentioned like the kind of person you are. How would you describe what kind of person you are that really supports this line of work?
I'm detail-oriented. I really I'm a problem solver and multitask, and that's some of the traits that the individuals have to be, is you have to be able to do all of that. And I also like to think outside the box.
Oh, so like a creative thinker?
Yes.
And so as a child, were you also, you mentioned the puzzles and the games and stuff. Did you play cops and robbers a lot, or?
Oh, yeah.
But you wanted to be the one behind them picking up the crime scene.
Picking up the crime scene and stretching out the crime scene tape.
Yeah. So you mentioned preserving the crime scene. How do you do that? What does that mean?
Well, when we get called out, if there's a major crime, the first responders there are going to be the first line patrol officer, and they're going to find the scene and then call us. When we come out, it's not always preserved ideally, so we'll come in and we'll determine where we should cordon off the scene and if we should make the scene bigger. Most patrolmen will cordon off the area, but not all of them are as trained as we are as to think outside the box and think, well, we need to also think of where the suspect entered, where he left, and preserve those areas so that we can go after clues.
Okay. And so what is the first thing you look for when you arrive at a crime scene?
Well, I think it all depends on the type of crime. But one of the things, you know, depending on what you have, and I have a quick story, I had a call that came in as a suicide, and we had an individual down, and he had a gunshot wound to the head, and it was in a garage, and when I arrived, the paramedics were there, and they had just pronounced him dead. And the sergeant said, "Oh, it's just a suicide. Just do what you have to do, and let's wrap this up." My first question was, "Where's the gun?" And the gun wasn't in the scene. Oh. So those are things that you have to look for. Is if you have.
Why did they think it was a suicide then?
Other individuals that were there, family members said he shot himself. But it turned out, long story short, is the gun was inside the house and under a sink, and so it turned out to be an accidental shooting. A roommate shot him by accident. But those are things that you're trained to look for. Is if I have this, what was the motive, or what was the actual tool that was used, or the weapon, and we need to find that.
Breaking it down, yeah. Now, just because we opened with the whole Dexter idea, Is that part of your job too? The whole blood spatter, is that part of the forensics? First of all, does a blood spatter analyst actually exist?
Yes.
Okay, so that actually is a real job.
Yes.
So he's doing one little specific bit of what you do in a whole. Is that correct?
Yes, and we call them forensic disciplines, and there's several different ones. There's gunshot trajectory, there's footprint or tire track analysts, there's blood spatter, and those are all things you can become an expert in and specialize in. But most of the time, you start off in crime scene investigation, and you can stay in that form. But if you want to expand your expertise, you will then move into a different discipline.
Okay, so he's basically just sort of getting started, or focusing on one specific.
Discipline. Yes.
Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite?
You have a list. Where's your thing? You have a list. Your bio has a list of how many. Okay, I can't even count real quick. It's like 20, 25 skills and expertise sections.
I would have to say that gunshot trajectory is my favorite.
Ooh, that sounds good. When we come back, we're going to talk about gunshot trajectory. If it wasn't potentially so gory and it sounds like it should be kind of fun.
Yeah, well, it is.
Isn't that weird to say?
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Mark Waldo. Yeah! That's the news van going to the crime scene. You're listening to Sweet Life. I am Brooke Peterson, helping you find whatever helps and whatever works to make it sweet. I am here with Mark Waldo, forensic specialist and crime scene investigator, and we are just getting started. Before our break, we were talking about his favorite discipline or favorite skill and expertise, which is gunshot trajectory. And I'd like to go into that a little bit more. What does that mean, and what does that do for you as an investigator?
Well, when you're conducting, if you have a shooting, you obviously have a victim that's been shot. You may have a cartridge casing on the floor, which you can then take back to firearms and then enter it and get an identification as to what type of gun it was. But a lot of times the question is, where was the shooter, and where was he standing at, how far, what was the distance? And that's where gunshot trajectory comes in. And it's one of my favorites. And what we can do is by looking at, there's several different areas within that that you can gain expertise in, but some of them are, say, bullet holes in glass. We can determine sequencing as to which one was the first shot, second shot, and that's just from studying the radio fractal lines within the glass.
Wow.
And then we can also use lasers and string, and we go from the bullet holes in the wall or a victim. We don't actually use the victim. We'll use like a dummy to reconstruct it.
So this really does sound like the TV shows.
Oh, yeah. The TV shows are realistic as far as the techniques and everything. What really goes beyond is us going back and interviewing. I don't interview suspects or do any of that. We strictly do the analysis of the evidence. And then also the quick return. You swab for DNA and you have an identification within 10 minutes, and usually it takes weeks for DNA.
Weeks. Now, going back to the gun trajectory, you were saying at the break that you can also determine how tall a person is based on the gun trajectory?
Yes. We couldn't give you the exact, like say the suspect was 6'1.5". Mm-hmm. However, if we have bullet holes, like say in a surface in a wall or in a vehicle, and we recreate it, we draw back with using lasers or string from the bullet holes back to an area which will give you an approximate location. And it varies. It can vary anywhere from 1 to 2 feet in distance, but you can actually get an actual location where the shooter was, which would also help you look for the cartridge casings if it was a semi-automatic weapon.
I see.
And also you take it back and it will determine the height. And again, that's going to vary. Mm-hmm. However, it will give you somewhat of a height of what type of suspect or how tall he is.
Like a height window or something. How accurate? Like within 6 inches?
Within between 6 and 8 inches.
Okay, all right. And I guess that helps just narrow the suspect pool.
Right.
Clearly. So it sounds like you have to be really good at math.
The
science is pretty clear, but the math, yeah?
And I have to admit, I'm not the all-time A student in math. However, if you learn trigonometry and you learn the basics, you can actually calculate everything back.
So you don't have to be brilliant in math. You can learn the formulas that you need regularly,
yes,
kind of thing, and be able to plug in the numbers.
Yes.
That's cool. That's good enough for me. Now, it looks like you have a very long list of education. It's really impressive. It looks like you are constantly honing skills, learning skills, polishing skills, becoming certified. Is that part of the job, or is that Mark?
I would say it's part of the job, but a lot of it's more Mark. It's me. I really enjoy learning. I'm constantly putting myself through training. With budget cuts and everything, the departments just don't have the funding to send everyone to training every year. But I truly believe that training is what keeps your skills up. And I put myself through a lot of training on my own dime, but it helps. And it helps when I'm out there at a crime scene. I could learn the latest technique in doing something and then put it towards solving that crime. How
are the techniques changing now with technology? Have there been a lot of changes in the past few years?
All the basic techniques are still there. Everything is, I would say, enhanced. The greatest and latest, newest thing is the DNA, as I said, the touch DNA, and that has just been a great tool that we're using. And to give you a quick example, we had a string of auto burglaries, and what criminals are doing is they're using spark plugs. They break up the porcelain around it, and then they create a little chip, and it's probably the size of a little pebble. The porcelain's harder than the glass, so if they just throw it at the car window, it'll shatter the glass, and that's how they enter. So I thought...
Criminals, I have to say, they're pretty clever, aren't they?
Yeah, and you have to think like them, and you have to think a step ahead. But I took that little porcelain and I swabbed it and sent it in, and I got a hit and actually put the guy away for a string of auto burglaries.
Based on a pebble.
Based on a pebble size.
Pebble, or ish. Well, that's cool. So, and you learned about that through one of your continuing education classes?
Yes, and through one of my online or ongoing trainings. In fact, it was Pasadena Police Department that were getting a lot of good hits at doing this. And so I took it back down to Santa Ana, and we got a conviction.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, that sort of brings me to my next question. Why do you do this?
I think a lot of it is for the victims' families. I've been a victim of residential burglary before. I know what it's like. So when we go out to a burglary at a home or a business, I try to do everything I can because I know how the victim feels. They feel violated. They feel like, someone came in, got all their stuff. They're also scared that the perpetrator might come back. And then also for like violent crimes, the family just is distraught and they want to know who did it. And I really want to bring closure to the victims.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's always a flip side. There's the pros and the cons. What would you say for anybody interested in this? Let them know what the cons might be that they have to be aware of.
The cons would be long hours, extremely long hours. I work a 12-and-a-half-hour shift.
Oh, wow.
I work 3 days one week and 4 days the next. Although many say, well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. But one 12-hour shift can easily become a 20 22-hour shift,
right.
depending on what kind of crime you get. And I've been on scenes for up to 24 hours and had to go home, get some rest, and then come back.
Right.
So it's very demanding as far as that. And you do work holidays and you work weekends. So I would say those are the cons of the job.
But has your experience over the years, has it changed your opinion of human beings, of people? What do you think about people these days?
Yes, it has. And it's kind of funny because every day I go to work, I'm always surprised about what someone does. And you would think after all these years of doing what I do in the city that I do, or the city that I work in, that I wouldn't be surprised. But every day it's different. Really? And lately, you just think, what is going on with everyone just committing such violent crimes? But you have to go, think away from that and then just focus in on solving the crime and going on. And I guess that would be a pro, is that there's always going to be crime, so there is job security.
That's true. Is it very competitive, by the way?
Very competitive nowadays. Really? It wasn't when I started, but since the CSI shows,
interesting.
It has created a lot of competition.
Oh.
Before, people didn't really know what I did, and now they do, and everyone wants to do it.
Wants a piece, so to speak.
Yeah.
What do you tell your children about what you do?
Actually, they know exactly what I do, and they're very interested. They always want to hear stories. I don't tell them the gory stories, and I don't tell them the real violent things.
How old are they?
I have one that just turned 18, and one that will be 14, and a 23-year-old. So all
Would you encourage
girls.
them? Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Would you encourage them to follow in your footsteps?
Maybe the middle one, the 18-year-old.
Why is that?
She's very much like me, and she's kind of looking right now. She's looking at universities and colleges and trying to figure out what she wants to do. She wants to go into law enforcement, but I don't want her to do the patrol type law enforcement. So she's actually looking at FBI. So,
good for her.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, anything else you want to add about your job? As far as for people who might be interested in following what you're doing? Well,
I would say stay in school, get your education first. Don't go around the hard way. Finish the education, because that's going to put you at the top of the list when you apply. And because if you don't finish now, once you get started, it'll just delay everything. So continue with school, get through it, and you'll succeed.
And focus. And it sounds like they need to really widen their skills. This list is very impressive. So thank you so much for coming in. Mark Waldo came all the way up here from Orange County, which for anybody not in the area, that's a pretty tall order, and we really appreciate it. In the next half of the show, we're going to take a walk. You've been listening to Sweet Life. I'm Brooke Peterson. You can like us on Facebook by searching Sweet Life Radio Show. Until next time, make it sweet.